Welcome to something incredible. This package from OnePlus contains their brand new OnePlus 7 Pro, and let me tell you right now, it is not just a step, but a leap forward. So in this video, we're going to be quickly unboxing it and then comparing it against the Galaxy S10 Plus, and I think the results are going to surprise you. First things first, you've got this little red packet on top, and that contains a standard silicone case for the phone. You've got the device itself, and then underneath that is where it starts to look a little different. You've got a red cable, USB Type-C, but more importantly a Warp Charge 30 adapter. It lets you charge the phone nearly 40% faster than past generations. And here we have it. The OnePlus 7 Pro treads a fine line between being svelte and chunky. It's surrounded by gracious curves and it fits well in the hand, but at the same time, its 206-gram mass makes it very noticeably heavier than the 175-gram S10 Plus. To give it credit, the design is slick, and I really like the slightly matte finish on the back, but the curves and the camera bump together do mean that the phone has a lot of table wobble. The S10 doesn't at all. The company has brought its vibration motor completely up to speed with Samsung's in this phone, so you get really crisp, responsive haptic feedback, but the OnePlus does miss out on a few key features which might be important to you. It has no headphone jack, no IP rating for water and dust resistance, and it's also got Gorilla Glass 5 on the front as opposed to Gorilla Glass 6 on the S10. Now that in itself, in theory at least, makes the Samsung up to 2 times more resistant to breaking from a drop. On the subject of hardware, it is worth mentioning that Samsung gives you a dedicated button for the Bixby Virtual Assistant, but also that their power button is way too high up on the phone. On the OnePlus, it is in a more reasonable position. You don't have to readjust your grip every time you want to use it, and the alert slider is back, which gives you a more tactile way to switch between ring, vibrate, and silent profiles. Alright, OnePlus has always been about speed, but the combination of hardware and software on the 7 Pro makes it potentially the fastest phone on the planet right now. Both devices go up to 12GB of RAM and are powered by the Snapdragon 855 chip, or the equivalent Exynos in some regions for the Samsung. The differences come though in 3 key ways. Number 1, the 7 Pro is one of the first flagship phones ever to use Universal Flash Storage 3.0, which is in theory up to 3 times faster than the S10's 2.1. So almost any process that uses that drive should be faster. So that's loading apps, the performance of apps, as well as the transfer speeds with your PC, although the difference isn't as drastic as the numbers might lead you to believe. I will explain this in my speed test video soon. The second advantage comes from software. The phone has not just a gaming mode that optimizes RAM usage, but a fanatic mode, kind of like an ultra gaming mode that looks at CPU, GPU, and RAM. Without any of this, the OnePlus 7 Pro already quite convincingly beats the Galaxy S10 Plus on Antutu benchmark. Turning on gaming mode increases that score by another 1000, and then Fanatic mode another 300 to 400. So in terms of peak performance, that software isn't really doing much, but it's more about the consistency of performance, as well as the standard stuff like blocking messages and notifications. The third thing is that the OnePlus 7 Pro has a 90Hz display, which means a display that refreshes 90 times per second, compared to 60 on the S10 and almost every other phone. It's not something that my camera can even capture, but to the human eye it brings a whole new level of fluidity to the UI. But also just bear in mind that most third-party apps will still refresh at up to 60 times a second, so it's not like your average game will just start running smoother. About that display, it's the best display OnePlus has ever used. Ironically, it's a Samsung component, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it takes up nearly 90% of the phone's front, and that's an achievement. Both have Quad HD Plus panels, both have support for super high contrast HDR10 Plus content, and both are curved, but interestingly, Samsung's curve is much sharper. The OnePlus screen almost melts around the sides. The brightness looks comparable, and although the S10 takes it in saturation straight out the box, if you switch the OnePlus to NTSC in its color settings, I'd say both look pretty comparable. Right, so to achieve this full screen, OnePlus has had to mount the front camera on a mechanized slider, which means it's always going to take just that little bit longer to switch cameras. Credit where due though, this is one of the fastest motorized sliders, and the phone uses its gyro sensors to detect if it's falling, and then retracts the camera, which kind of somewhat addresses that issue of the extra fragility. Samsung's alternative is this punch hole in the top right of the screen, which I think still beats having a notch, but I also know that some people do have trouble with the asymmetry it brings to the design. Neither is going to leave you worrying about battery. Thankfully, Samsung weighs in with a 4100 mAh cell and OnePlus with a 4000. I've got a full battery comparison coming very soon, but I can say right now that if you did want to take advantage of the super smooth 90Hz screen on the OnePlus, then that will cause an additional battery hit, on top of the already demanding resolution of both displays. Regardless, OnePlus absolutely slaughters the S10 Plus in charging speed, with its Warp Charge 30 tech, providing up to 30 watts of power versus Samsung's 15. It can also reverse charge other phones using a cable, but that doesn't change the fact that Samsung has the wireless advantage. It can wirelessly charge as well as wirelessly reverse charge. Software is crucial to the whole experience, and thankfully both are running Android 9 with two very different looking but nonetheless very capable skins on top. With OnePlus you get Oxygen OS, which is closer to a pure Google aesthetic. You now get a built-in screen recorder and an unusual option called Zen Mode, which basically stops you using your phone for 20 minutes, with no exceptions. With Samsung you get One UI, which looks clean in its own way. It has a better looking dark mode to save battery and has a focus on reachability with one hand, and also AR emojis, which are as good as they've ever been here. You can really tell that cameras were a central part of both of these flagships. They each have a triple camera setup featuring one main camera, one ultra-wide, and one telephoto, so that makes this on-paper comparison quite a simple one. In terms of telephoto, OnePlus has 3 times magnification, which as you can see here, side by side with the 2 times on the S10 Plus, is quite a bit more zoomed in. However, the S10 takes it in terms of ultra-wide. Whilst the Galaxy has a mega-wide 123-degree field of view, OnePlus has a kind of meh 117 degrees. Don't get me wrong, you'll still very much notice the change between using the main camera and the ultra-wide on the OnePlus, but the difference won't be as dramatic as it is on the Samsung. The 7 Pro's main camera has a 48 megapixel sensor, compared to just 12 on the Samsung, which might make this seem like a really obvious choice, but the end images are in the same league. I do have a full, detailed camera comparison coming tomorrow, which will make things crystal clear. It's great to see though that the OnePlus now comes with a wide f1.6 aperture, even better than the f1.7 we saw last year, although it doesn't quite match Samsung's variable aperture that can open all the way up to f1.5. Something I'm really excited about is that both cameras have a night mode, the ability to take bright photos in the dark. OnePlus has upgraded both the software and the hardware here to allow it to work better on this phone than its predecessor. The OnePlus 7 Pro is a phone of firsts for the company. One such addition is Dolby Atmos stereo speakers, and considering that the S10 also has this setup, why not pitch them against each other? Samsung's phone combines a 10 megapixel selfie camera with a depth sensor that makes for super high quality portrait selfies. The front camera here is as good as the rear camera on some phones. I'm happy to say though that there's been no compromise with a single 16 megapixel selfie camera on the OnePlus. I will go into this in more detail in the camera comparison, but safe to say it's good. And on that note, from Huawei, Samsung, and now OnePlus, we've actually seen a bit of a shift away from face scanning. Past OnePlus phones had super fast face unlocking, but because the front camera is now tucked away, this no longer makes sense. Samsung used to have an iris scanner on their flagships, but to achieve this new punch hole aesthetic, that had to be dropped too. Thankfully though, both have amazing fingerprint scanners. The Galaxy S10 Plus uses ultrasonic technology, which can still detect prints through wet or greasy fingers, and you pretty much just need to scrape it for it to detect your finger. The OnePlus still uses an optical scanner, but it is so much better than their last effort. I was a little underwhelmed when the company introduced the feature in the 6T, but with this phone, they've kept the same sensor, but increased the scanning area by about 25% and massively improved processing speed. So OnePlus has never been a fan of offering expandable storage, and that trend continues here, while the S10 does. But both do start with 128 gigs internally, so for me at least, that's quite a lot. Something that's a little bit less talked about is that Samsung's Wi-Fi is pretty much the most capable smartphone setup out there. It supports 802.11ax versus OnePlus's 802.11ac, and AX basically brings a couple of clever engineering tricks to not just improve speeds, but also save power. The OnePlus 7 Pro with 6GB of RAM here in the UK starts at £649. That's over a $200 saving on the S10 Plus. Taking that into account, OnePlus has just launched a killer phone in the 7 Pro, a phone that for the first time doesn't just match, but exceeds its competition in key ways. It beats the S10 Plus in charging speed and has a super slick display, but there is still a bit of corner cutting going on. And really, you'll need to decide if the omissions on the OnePlus, like the headphone jack, like wireless charging, microSD card support, IP rating, or the chunky size, are justified by the price saving. For some it will be, for others it won't. So, which phone do you think won? If you could subscribe for the camera, battery, and the speed comparisons, plus some other stuff I'm working on, that would be amazing. And I'll catch you in the next one.